How confident are you in the soil that you're planting into this spring? If you feel like you're just winging it and hoping that it'll all work out, there are actually some really easy homemade recipes that I want to turn you on to so you can take a lot of the guesswork out and ensure that your plants can get the best start that they possibly can this growing season. So in this video, I want to share a few of the soil drenches that I've made and used over the years. I'll show you how I'm using them this year, and then you can decide which is going to work best for you. We will be walking through 4 different ones, so you'll have options to choose from, although you might find that you want to combine a few together because they kind of hit different components. And welcome back to the channel, by the way. If you're new here, I'm Taylor, and I help gardeners explore sustainable and regenerative growing techniques without the cost and waste of a lot of modern gardening. And when I say modern gardening, I'm referring to the commonplace practices that home gardeners have been led to accept, but have only really been around for the past 75 years. 75 years may sound like a long time to you, but when we're talking about something as fundamental as gardening, that is a relatively short length of time. In that time, however, companies have arisen to provide home gardeners with the supposed means of making home growing more doable. And one of the main ways that this is done is by using fertilizer. This is a basic all-purpose plant food with a 12:4:8 NPK ratio, so great for giving your plants a quick boost of nitrogen as they're getting growing. The instructions say shake evenly onto the soil, work into the top 1 to 3 inches of soil, and then water it to start feeding it. And it recommends that you apply approximately half of a cup of this for every 10 square feet once every 3 months. So this bottle would feed the plants in this 8-foot by 4-foot, 32 square foot garden bed for half the growing season, and then I need another one to finish things out. Now we'll take a look a little later in this video on why you might not want to do this, but we'll sum things up by saying this fertilizer has the goal of supplying plants with nutrients that the plants can readily uptake into their roots and help them grow. I'll say it again, this approach to fertilization is very recent. Before 100 years ago, barely any home gardeners or farmers even were using synthetic fertilizers on their garden beds. Which begs the question, how in the world were plants able to grow without being hand-fed nutrients? And this will lead us nicely into our soil drenches, because the truth is plants have always been hand-fed nutrients, just not typically from people. Microorganisms in the soil, on the soil, in the air even, have been the primary feeders and caretakers of plants. And so as we look at these soil drenches, that is what we're going to be focusing on cultivating. Like I said, there are 4 soil drenches that we'll be looking at today, and stay tuned to the end because you might hear some of these and then be confused. I know one of these especially is going to ruffle some feathers. All will be explained, and all of these can be made at home for little to no money with varying degrees of effort. So first up, we'll take a look at our very simple all-purpose fertilizer replacement that comes from a traditional Korean natural farming approach. Any time of the year is great to make it, but if you're watching this in spring, you're especially poised to make this one for some great results. The second soil drench is going to come straight from the sea or from sea salt. Hang in with me for a minute. If that sounds like blasphemy, I'm not going to ask you to go salt in your fields. In our third slot, we've got ourselves a good old compost extract, easy to make, a great source of beneficial biology and some specific compounds, and overall a great way to make your compost go a bit further. And then we'll close things out with my current favorite soil drench, JADAM Microbial solution. So super easy to make. Anyone can and should try it this season. I'll have the links in the description to all of the recipes if you'd like them in printable form, or you can scan the code on the screen and get access to my entire resource library. So if that sounds like a good roadmap, let's hop in and start making them. Comfrey, trying to live. It's literally... Oh my gosh, what is going on with Comfrey? That's crazy. It's so funny. Ugh. Nasty. Sorry, that's just so ridiculous. So first up, our all-purpose fertilizer. This is the recipe straight out of the JADAM Organic Farming book. Great resource, very simple recipes in there, and helpful philosophy. The JADAM liquid fertilizer is very simply made by combining 3 ingredients in a container of water: plant debris, leaf mold soil, and dechlorinated water. Now for the plant debris, again, if you're wanting to make this in time for spring planting, it actually works out really well because I almost guarantee that you're gonna start seeing spring weeds poking their heads out several months before your delicate veggie crops can go on the ground. So as long as you're doing your spring yard cleanup and weeding, just toss the weeds in a bucket. You can put grass clippings in there as well if you've got a lawn. Whatever is loving the nitrogen-rich spring rain is going to contain, surprise, surprise, a lot of nitrogen. Once you fill up your bucket or once you finish weeding your yard, you're gonna add a handful of leaf mold soil, fill up the bucket with water so that the plant debris is just submerged. And now this is going to be up to you where you get your leaf mold soil. We try to collect some leaf mold soil from the natural forests in our area. This year we've got a whole bunch of leaf mold soil that we scooped up from beneath the leaf litter that had just piled up and accumulated in our yard for the past 3 years. Leaf mold soil is the soil that has been built from below the decaying leaves, and this stuff contains tons of naturally occurring microorganisms. When you feed these guys plant debris, they are going to get to work along with the microbes already on the weeds and the grass and stuff, and they're going to just decompose and break down the plant matter into bioavailable nutrients. But more importantly, the microbes themselves will multiply and adapt and change to become the type of microbes that can process these kinds of nutrients. Microorganisms, especially bacteria, reproduce at a very fast pace, and so they're going to multiply quickly, even over the course of a single week, to the point where this stuff is ready to use, to be strained out and used as a soil drench. What you're getting in the strained out liquid is a combination of essential plant nutrients, but also microbes that are fine-tuned to be able to process those nutrients and continue there in the soil. Now this stuff is stinky. It's the only one of the soil drenches that should smell putrid. That's the point. The anaerobic microbes in the liquid fertilizer are okay to use for use as a soil drench. Soil has anaerobic pockets. It's made up of both aerobic and anaerobic microorganisms. So long as your soil has proper drainage, this stuff shouldn't stink up your yard for more than a day or so after you apply it. The anaerobes will find their home in the soil or die off. The facultative anaerobes will adjust to their new environment, and your soil will be more alive and ready to plant into. We'll cover how I recommend using each of the soil drenches at the end. It's not complicated, but you do want to wait a few days after applying this undiluted to your soil before you plant, just in case. And one more thing before we move on, once you strain out the liquid to use as a soil drench, feel free to fill up the bucket again with water and let it to continue to brew with the plant debris in there. You can add more weeds and plant debris over time and let it age indefinitely. And in fact, this stuff is really used best when it's fully putrefied the plant debris into sludge. Sounds gross, I know. However, if you don't have any of this from years past, I want you to try it out. Of course, if you do have the really old stuff, use that, it's gonna be better. I've got a bucket here that I made at the beginning of last winter from the last comfrey leaves and some leftover roots that I had. If it's still freezing overnight, and if you're wanting to make this in a week, I recommend bringing the brew indoors so the microbes can warm up and decompose things a bit faster. One last thing I promise on this fertilizer, this is gonna mold and it might grow colorful molds, who knows? That's all part of the decomposition process. This stuff isn't supposed to look pretty. Bugs get in there, lay their larvae, just seal it up, all the better. The insect larva will decompose and turn into fertilizer. Don't overthink it. Don't go breathing deeply over the top of the bucket. But this stuff is totally fine to use. Now let's move on to our second soil drench. This one comes with a little bit of nuance because depending on where you live, this is going to be easier or more difficult to accomplish. Seawater is one of the 9 core inputs from the world of curry and natural farming. If you'd like to learn all about KNF, you can check out my book. And I think that people get scared of using seawater or salt water because of the very real danger that salt poses to soil biology and plant health when applied in significant amounts. Salt draws out a lot of moisture. It's been used forever to preserve food, dry meat, etc. It'll dry out your plants if you put a lot of it directly onto your soil. However, a small amount, as is the case with many things in life, goes a long way to bringing health. And so when it comes to seawater, we're looking at dozens of essential nutrients and trace minerals, plus a host of beneficial biology. So this stuff is excellent for remineralizing effect on your soil, but it also brings in a ton of beneficial microbes. If you don't have access to seawater, you can make a replacement sans biology by mixing a high quality sea salt, non-iodized table salt with water at a rate of 1 part salt to 30 parts water. Here I've mixed Redmond's real salt, which I'm a big fan of, 1 to 30 in filtered water. And then when you go to apply seawater or salt water, you're gonna dilute it again at a rate of 1 part seawater to 30 parts dechlorinated water. If you're making your own salt water, give it a taste test as long as your equipment is clean. and see how minimal the salty flavor is once you've diluted it, again, 1 to 30 in water. It's very minimal, and we'll look at this in the application section of the video. It's just a very light watering on your garden beds. Now, these first 2 soil drenches are things that I think pretty much anyone can make so long as you've got access to a grocery store and some buckets. The next soil drench, however, will require you to have some homemade compost on hand. Homemade compost contains all of the beneficial biology that store-bought compost doesn't. And I hate to say it this harshly, but chances are if you're buying your average bag of compost or getting it delivered in bulk, you're not getting much, if anything, in the way of biology, most likely. If the compost you buy comes with a biological analysis, then great. But for the most part, every mass-produced compost is going to be fairly pasteurized prior to shipping to distributors because they can't risk contaminating it with any bad or harmful pathogens, and they don't want to be sending out insect larvae in their bags either. So if you've got some homemade compost that's relatively finished, that's what you're going to want to use here. Hot compost, cold compost, it all works great. To make a compost extract, it's really simple. You need your compost, your bucket of water, and a paint strainer or some way to filter out the big chunks from your compost. Now, depending on how you want to do this, you may not need to strain it. If you use a strainer, you can actually just add leftover solids from the compost back into your compost to continue to absorb more biology. If you don't care about adding it back to your pile, no problem. You'll just want to make a slurry first. And this is sort of like making a roux for your soup. You don't want chunks of flour floating around in your soup. You want it all well integrated. So without a strainer, just add a little bit of water to your bucket first and massage the compost in that small amount of water. If you're trying to do this on an industrial scale, maybe you want to use machines to mix this up. For home gardeners and small scale farmers like myself, hands are going to work great. If you're using a paint strainer, just hold the bag like this under the water and then massage the compost so that the leachate starts clouding the water. And I realize this looks simple, but let me tell you, this stuff contains tons of beneficial soil biology, tons of humic acid and fulvic acids as well. Humic and fulvic acids are crazy beneficial to soil health. They help build soil structure. They increase nutrient carrying capacity. They increase water retention. Look up the benefits of humic acid. If you don't believe me, this stuff is pretty well researched and documented. I won't gush too much more about these guys. The main difference, to my knowledge, between humic and fulvic acids are size. Humic acid is a larger molecule, helps build long-term soil structure, whereas fulvic acids are smaller and a bit more interested in transporting nutrients to plants. Both should show up in properly well-made, well-decomposed compost. The main thing that you want to look for is to see if the materials in your pile are relatively unrecognizable. If you can tell what every single thing is in your compost, that's probably not quite ready to use for compost extract. We want the microbes to have decomposed a lot of the organic matter, and that's going to give us the sign that they are present in good quantities. Once you've made this extract, use it. Don't let it sit for more than a few hours because it'll start going anaerobic, which is a generalized way of saying that the aerobes that you just washed off of the compost are going to die off in favor of anaerobic bacteria and fungi. Again, not necessarily a huge problem or risk for damaging your soil, but they're not the ones that we're trying to get here. Now, before we move on to our last soil drench, I want to touch on a change that I have made, having done a bit of personal research, and this is going to be totally up to you how you want to think about this. There is a step that I know a lot of folks like to take, myself included, where we basically take our compost extract and then multiply the microorganisms using a bubbler or an aerator pump and maybe feeding it a few extra nutrients. And as I mentioned earlier, microbes, especially bacteria, multiply quickly on their own when they have a food source, but they multiply even more quickly when you create the ideal conditions for them to grow. So adding a bubbler and letting this extract aerate for 24 to 36 hours is going to allow the microbes to multiply very rapidly. And that, in my opinion, is a really good thing. It doesn't magically generate new nutrients. This is a good thing, multiplying the biology. A lot of people have found tons of success using aerated compost tea and aerated worm castings tea. Check out Dr. Lainey Ingham's work if you want to learn more about them. The change that I'm making to my recommendation, though, because I have recommended these in the past as a soil drench, is that from what I have read through more recently, the way that the microbe soup is getting aerated encourages the microbes to develop a sticky residue, a biofilm, that helps them to stick to whatever they get sprayed onto. So using this as a foliar spray, when you spray your aerated compost tea on plant leaves, the water drips off, the sticky microbes are left behind to help aid the plant in a number of ways, crowding out pathogens and disease, etc. What I'm led to believe now, though, is that because of that sticky quality, when you pour this on your soil as a soil drench, they're gonna stick to and hang out on those first few inches of topsoil and not get the chance to really penetrate to the lower layers of the soil where the plant roots are going to be going down into. Instead, if I do make a compost tea, more likely I'll be making and applying liquid IMO aerated teas, and I'll just stick to the foliar applications. I know that there is a grand divide in the broader home gardening community of the internet regarding the efficacy of aerated compost and warm teas. It's beyond the scope of this video to get fully into it because it's not a soil drench that I'm necessarily recommending. Although it might work great for you, I'd be curious to hear from anyone in the comments who has used it as such and their results. That said, I'm a believer in the aerated teas. I think that they have a ton of potential for home gardeners. But let's go ahead and get into our fourth and final soil drench. And if I were to pick one for y'all to try, this would probably be it, just because I've had the most positive overall experience. It's again from the JADAM organic farming book, a very simple recipe. The JADAM microbial solution, we've made a lot of videos talking about the solution and why I like it. Honestly, the main reason that I'm such a fan of it is because you can source everything to make it very easily. You'll just need a handful of leaf mold soil, same stuff as from before, a bucket of dechlorinated water, some high quality sea salt, hello, and a cooked potato or another cooked grain that you can blend up into a slurry. The carbohydrate and sea salt are your food sources for the microbes in the leaf mold soil. Mix these up in your bucket of water. Again, depending on how much you are going to use this, you may or may not need a paint strainer. If you're only using this as a soil drench, you won't need one. Mix these up in a bucket just like you did for the compost extract, but this time, because of the carbohydrates and the small amount of salt, a fermentation process is going to begin. And it's a quick one. How long it takes is going to require you to perform a visual inspection. We'll go ahead and show you 3 buckets to illustrate what the microbial solutions look like at various hours within their fermentation. And you can tell by the way that the foam has formed a thick disc at the surface of the water. It's kind of coming off of the edges of the bucket. That is a mature fermentation. On the surface, the less mature bucket, you can sort of see the difference. The foam activity isn't as intense. And then on the one that's gone a bit too long, you can see that the disc has started to break apart. And it indicates that the microorganisms are diminishing in population as they're dying off, having expended their viable food source and spent too long without oxygen. Use this stuff when the foam is at its peak and you've got yourself one of the easiest, most powerful homemade microbial solutions that you can make. This one that I've got here, I just carried it up here to make this video and it sloshed around and broke up the foam on top, but it is about ready to use. Now let's talk through using these because there's several ways that you can use them based on what you're trying to accomplish and where you're at in the growing season. The big factor that matters is if you have plants in the ground or not. At the time of filming this video, we are coming close to getting to plant, but we don't have anything in the ground yet. So all of these can get watered in undiluted, with the exception of salt water. Of course, always dilute it 1 to 30 before applying. When we apply these, we either want to irrigate immediately after, or better yet, time it with the rain. If we can water or get the rain to wash it down and into the lower layers of the soil, we're just trying to wet the soil surface. If it's not going to rain and we aren't irrigating yet, we will want to add some extra water and try to get the soil fully saturated. If you're applying any of these with plants in the ground, you want to dilute. For the week-old fertilizer, dilute it 1 to 10. For 1 month fertilizer, go 1 to 100. Anything past 6 months, I like to play it safe and only apply it 1 to 1,000. But to be honest, I really only use these as a soil drench before planting at this point because I've got a different maintenance spray that I use from my KNF inputs. Dilute your JADAM microbial solution 1 to 10 in water, and your compost extract should be all right to apply it undiluted so long as you're just wetting the soil surface with it. However, and whenever you apply these, one of the most important things that you can do is mulch your garden beds. And I'd say mulch before so that your soil drench can inoculate your mulch a bit too. I've seen someone recently even just use their compost extract to inoculate their mulch and then apply the mulch. That works great for some mulches more than others. Leaves and straw probably are great for that. Whatever you do, you want that organic mulch feeding soil biology and shielding the soil from the sun. I like to use these 2-gallon watering cans for my soil drenches. If you strain out the solids, you can have the caps on and get a bit more even coverage. If you don't want to use the strainer for the compost extract and the microbial solution, you can just take the caps off. Given you have watering cans where the caps come off. This takes a little bit of time, but you're really doing your soil and your plants a huge service by waking up and supplementing them with the beneficial biology in these soil drenches. Now, I hear some of you saying, great, let's get more biology into our soil. What about nutrients? And that's totally reasonable to ask, especially considering how we gardeners have been conditioned to view soil health and botany in general. And it's obviously true that plants need nutrients to grow. They can't build their bodies, let alone fruit, without nutrients. What's not necessarily true, however, is the assumption that they aren't already present enough in your soil already. And these are the two major schools of thought, with a zillion degrees in between. On one end of the spectrum, you've got folks who say biology is all that matters. And on the other end, you've got folks who say nutrients are all that matter for plant health. And then you've got those who say, without the nutrients in the soil being added, the microbes will find nothing to work with. And then you've got those who say that without the microbes in the soil, it doesn't matter how many nutrients you've got. The reason that I want to present this spectrum to you is so that you know that there is an active debate, maybe not always the most productive one, but there is a spectrum of thought with intelligent people throughout. You need to obviously decide what works best for you, because if you get the results that you're looking for, then keep doing that. If something isn't working super well, then there's no reason that you have to just hold on blindly to your particular school of thought at that time. We fall into the biology forward way of thinking. I'm inclined to believe that most soil contains most of the nutrients that plants need. The problem isn't typically nutrient availability, it's nutrient bioavailability. And that's where the biology comes into play. It breaks up organic nutrient compounds, chelates minerals, delivers them to plant roots, and much more. That said, I can see that the organic mulch that I lay down in my garden beds each year gets slowly eaten away and disappears, which leads me to believe that the microbes have consumed it and might like some more sustenance. So that's the context that I want to give you for this video on the way to apply these soil drenches. Unlike this granular all-purpose fertilizer, which provides nutrients strictly in raw forms, I'm trying to train my soil biology to build soil for me, using the resources that it already has in the soil already, utilizing the mulch and benefiting from the added microbial communities that I water into my garden beds and spray onto my plants throughout the season. If you'd like to hear more about any of these topics, or if I said something that was confusing to you or you disagree with, let me know in the comments. Again, check out our free resources if you are going to be making any of these. And if you want to dive a little bit deeper into some soil biology for home gardeners right now, you can check out our 101 video that covers a lot of the details of what's happening down there from a microbial POV. As always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.